All right, what's up, gang? Some people who are watching this are going to have done this challenge also. So that's cool. If you're watching this from the Discord, hey, what's up? I'm Dylan. This was a challenge to do this redesign with a limited palette, which had kind of everything you would need, but I think left a lot to be desired, obviously, if you needed to recreate this ability. So I want to talk about a few things. First, I want to go through how I sort of created my own palette for this, and then I won't break it down track by track because there's 250 tracks, and often it was a lot of resampling and time stretching and all these things that I can't necessarily recreate for this video, but I'll talk about the chains that I did use to get these sounds and my overall approach. And yeah, talk about things from like a high level about like how I'm thinking about this ability and abilities in general, and when I'm doing sound design for them. So yeah, the second voice crack. I'm 30 years old. My voice does not need to be cracking this much. The first thing that I want to go through is this little ambience here. It was this constant waves. I just kind of grabbed that, and then there were some pieces during it where you could hear people or something. I can't remember. I did part of this like 2 weeks ago and part of it recently, so it was a bit disjointed in my process here, so some of the stuff I need a bit of a refresher on. So you may watch me fumble as we do this video, but we're here together. We're here to learn. We're here to have a good time. So yeah, grab these two things. Just did some edits at certain points, and then when I'm doing these redesigns, I cut out ambience during the main ability parts because why not, right? It's covering it up. It's just adding noise. Anything you can do to clean up the clip and really bring focus to the work that you did is good. So yeah, that's how I created that with that. And then one of the main things that I did was I felt like there was a lack of tonality in the pack that we were given. So the way that I created that, these might not be the best examples again, because this is one of the first things that I did. So these aren't the exact samples that I ran through. But essentially, it's using Isotope's Spectral Denoise, and this preset, pause and zoom in if you'd like, combined with these advanced settings, you can basically turn anything into tonality. There might not be much tonality for it to pull from, so it might not always sound good, as we'll probably notice in a moment. But also, my computer might freak out because it's a super hefty plugin. I'm recording 4K, OBS, stuff on the master. My computer's not great to begin with, but we'll see. So first, without it, here's what we start with. And then if we do spectrally denoise it, actually I'm going to preemptively put a little bit of EQ cut on the bottom just in case. Ow, that was very loud, but you get the point. It's going to take all of... This one will be better. Yeah, so that's with. Essentially, it's just going to remove any noise or what it can identify as noise and give you this really normally not what you want in music or whatever, very artifact spectrally thing, but it's cool. So what I did was I basically just ran every sound through it, and anything that was somewhat worth keeping, I kept. So I'm just going to turn this down a little bit so you can see whoops. So we got like stuff like this. Belt. Bacon frying. Just to kind of get some sounds that don't have so much top end and like noise in them. And that you can run through reverb, you can resample, you can stretch, you can pitch, you can put into faceplant, whatever. That was my first step because I felt like there was a lack of that. Because you had these, which are cool, but also it was too easy to just like pick something out of there. Like it wasn't really like, I wanted to kind of push because I am not used to doing these types of challenges, right? Where I have to work with this limited palette. It was not really something that I'd ever needed to do. So of course you can just pick one of these and you can make it like that's the sound of it. But I wanted to really push myself in processing audio and really transforming it into something new, which I think I did. So that was the first thing. I wanted that tonality. The second thing, which I don't know if I have the phase plant patch for it yet, because I was using phase plant on trial, which ran out while I was doing this challenge. So I think if I pull it up, oh, you still get it. Oh yeah, it won't run audio through. So this is the electricity. I may as well talk about this now. I would take some of these samples and run it through here in different chains, obviously. But for the electricity, actually, I don't like changing what I was talking about. What I was talking about was these granular things, because I don't have the phase plant thing for these yet anymore. But it was basically just these tonality things ran through something similar to this, where you're taking the what's it called? The granular engine here, and I was just doing a bunch of really random stuff to like the harmonics, the shift, run it into reverb, distortion, pitch shift, blah, blah, blah. I didn't even save the patch. I don't know why. I think it was probably the start of this one, and I didn't think that this would be useful. I thought it was maybe too aggressive. But yeah, don't have that to show off. But it's essentially just this, run through the granular engine, resampled, pitch down, cool stuff. And then I used phase plant again because I felt, the second thing I'll talk about is the electricity was kind of weak, at least for this ability, because this ability, it's a damaging ability, right? It's a damaging area of effect thing, and it's really electrical. So where is our little thing here that we had? Cool stuff, but not for this. So you don't, if I hear that in a game, I'm not going to think that that's, that sounds like some sort of background object or something. It doesn't sound like an ability that's going to hurt me. So I wanted to make something more powerful. So what I did in my infinite wisdom in the, that's the wrong phrase to use because it was good. While I had my phase plant trial, which I can't show you now, it looks funny to have the plugin but not be able to show you the audio, essentially loaded that in, harmonics up too, and then I had LFOs. Oh no, these are just random, because you wanted to use random when you're doing electricity, obviously, or not, maybe not obviously, but at least I did, because it just kind of makes it even more chaotic when you're doing all these things. But essentially, it's the granular thing on the electricity, lots and lots of randomization on different things going to each other, just get a little bit of chaos going. A little bit of delay here, but what's really going to make it, what really made it a lot thicker was distortion plus bias, because I'm also pitch shifting it up, which you would think would make it weaker, but because you have these two biased distortions, it adds a lot of like dirt in the low end, which you wanted, because you wanted this electricity to be more powerful. So yeah, that was that. And then, modulate it and then just compress and limit it to death until it's essentially just like flat noise, because what we get out of it is this. Which I think sounds pretty sick, right? Like compared to this, a lot more powerful. So that was that. Then I had this, but I try not to use this too much, like the old disperser trick that I only really learned how to do properly and control well recently. So I'll just break it down really quick. Compressor just compresses anything that I throw in there to make sure that it's hitting the right volumes, because Filter Freak is very sensitive. So just really quick attack and release, so that when you throw stuff through here, goes really quick, because those really fast filter movements react really well with disperser. I use all pass phase because I don't have kilohertz subscription or whatever. And then the only thing that I do interesting is I use Unfiltered Audio's zip compressor, which has these interesting ways that you can compress things. So I did it according to brightness, which is different than just changing the side chain of it. It depending how bright the sound is, I think compared to itself or compared to some sort of threshold here, will compress the sound, right? So what that does is without it, I'll take off the last fucking two. Without it, you still have that really sharp transient before filter freak really cuts in, and it's not really given that sound. But with it, it keeps it all nice and warbly and nice, and doesn't have that top end that you would normally need to like filter out or denoise or something like that. I just find that this plugin really hits properly with that. And then I use de-reverb. I basically just use this because it helps shape the sound in an interesting way, because it's not like actually taking the sound and removing the reverb. It's basically just clamping down on the tail of it, and can really clean up stuff without necessarily affecting it too much. So especially with this where you don't want these tails. But again, I tried not to use these too much. They're cool, but I wanted to do something else kind of differently tonally with this project. And then the other thing I did to create my kind of initial palette was I had this chain in an old Ableton session where anything that I feed into it will kind of turn into this like washy top end distorted sound. It's essentially just in series, lots of distortion, OTT, distortion, OTT, granular to sort of like wash and spread it a little bit more and more until you end up with essentially just flat noise of this type of stuff. And you can see I named it probably garbage, thinking I probably wouldn't use it, but ended up actually using it a decent amount throughout this. Okay, so that's sort of my initial palette, I believe. Quite a big session, quite unorganized. So it's going to be a bit of a video here. Let me drink some coffee. Yeah, and I won't break down exactly everything because, as I discussed earlier, I did all of that processing to each one, sometimes stretching and doing other things as they went into that initial processing. And then I had other chains which did more processing, and then I tweaked those chains and put more stuff through it. So like, there's just no possible way to recreate all these chains. You just kind of have to freestyle stuff. And you can see I try lots of things out and stretch them, do these other things. And you can see like, if I go down to the way bottom here, like this area, I was doing so much resampling that the audio files are called stem. That's what, like 7 resamples, you know? So there's 250 tracks in here. Sometimes things are resampled multiple times. It's a lot. So we're not going to be able to go here and break down every single chain for every sound. But I hope that kind of as the ones that I do have up, plus this sort of initial palette and just the actual sound of the redesign, you can hear how I got to these things as I talked about like things at a higher level. The main part of this ability is, well, there's 2 things. There's the electricity and there's like this slow warbling sound, which I actually have the original here because I went and got the original stuff from YouTube just to kind of check it out, and probably for my own reel I'll export it in 4K and blah blah blah, but I didn't want to do that for the challenge and the Discord because it felt a little bit like cheating or something to upload a 4K footage while everyone else didn't. Anyways, this is the original audio. So you can hear main things is that electricity sound, which I would consider to kind of be the arc. And then you have the sort of like internal power warbling spinningness of it. And so that's essentially what I set out to create. And so I'll start with the low end stuff because there's less of it. So the main things are this. Which is the like granular thing that I talked about that I lost the phase plant thing for, but essentially just lots of grains moving around and affecting the pitch and whatnot so that you get all that movement in there. And then lots of random automation on the snap heap stuff, but essentially just trying to create this sort of like low warbly bass, but without being too powerful. And you can see a common theme throughout lots of really all my redesigns that have sort of an over time ability like this, is that the center, I'll edit out, even sometimes manually, the volume or whatever, just to kind of, because you don't want the ability to take up all this real estate the entire time. Which I guess is something I should mention now before I talk about the rest of the low end, is my entire, and I should have mentioned this first. A lot of my design for this was, I wanted to design this as if it was a real ability, and I wanted it to be very mindful, I won't go there. I wanted it to not take up too much real estate, because if you're in game, you have you could have like 10 plus abilities, plus music, plus an announcer, whatever, all going at once. You don't want all these abilities to be as like ultra powerful as they could be, right? They need to be respectful of the other things that can be happening in the mix. So when you have an ability like this, you don't need this to be going full on all the time. And then you also need to consider, how important is this ability? Like, what is the ability doing? This is just a little bit of a damaging over time thing. This isn't going to necessarily always be a game-breaking ability. This isn't like an ultimate, which needs to command attention and respect. This is a bit less so, right? It's more of like a zoning tool, and you see it. There's a big thing there. And you need to be able to hear it constantly, but you don't need to be like super frightened of it. So that to say, it doesn't need this huge, powerful sound. And I wanted to do this design with that in mind. So my low end here is actually fairly, I would say, mid-rangey. Like if I take the EQ and go here, I'm not really taking advantage of this really, really low end. A lot of it is more centered here. And so that was like one of my main considerations. And then I'll talk about that after, because so that was like the main low end. You had other stuff here, which again, I had more stuff. I'd cut it out. Originally, I was having problems with it being too watery. That was because I was using too much disperser at first. And anyways, but that's basically the gist of the low end. You have some here, which is a bit lower, but again, that's actually like mostly mid-range. You get a little bit here, but it's not like a defined, powerful low end. It's just like a bit of noise, essentially, that combines with the low here. I'll go through this afterwards, because this is kind of a mid-rangey spectrally thing. And I did a lot of resampling there. But that's basically how I wanted my low end to be. And then a little bit of granular, like pitch shifting here, like automation on this. This was one of the first things I did, so apologies that I need to check on this again. Kind of going with the ability is the mix here, so there's actually no pitch shifting happening here, and then as it goes, you're kind of accentuating the starts and the ends, because I also didn't want, as I was talking about before, with kind of respecting the hierarchy and like place that this ability needs to take up in players' brains as they're playing. You want to signify the start and the end of this ability, but it doesn't need to be obvious. Like, it doesn't need to catch their attention if they aren't necessarily already listening, right? Like, you don't need a transient for the end, and you don't need like distinct parts of it. You just kind of want this sounds to transform a bit, so that if they're listening, they know when it ends, but they don't need to be like told to pay attention again, if that makes sense. So you can do that a lot with either automation on things that exist, or just kind of subtly, especially with a lot of fades, introducing new elements. But especially if they're from the same palette, it just sounds like one sort of sound morphing, right? So did that with a little bit of pitch shifting, and then just general volume automation, just by grabbing this, reducing the gain, crossfading it. And that's really it for the low end. I'll talk about the electricity first, because it's sort of like the ultimate top end. Or I'll talk about while I was kind of talking about these signifiers, this is sort of the main one for its starting. I believe there's one other layer, actually. Yeah, so these three layers are sort of the main ones. Again, so apologies that it's kind of messy here. see with it, without it. Like, you could take it out if you really, you got feedback like, oh, we don't need the ability to be as obvious there or whatever. But this isn't taking up much room. Oops, I should probably take this off, but you can see, it's taking up there, it's adding noise or whatever to the start of the ability, adding more energy, and it's signifying the start of the ability. And because it's kind of sourced, it's like I took the tonal stuff and then dirtyified it to create this probably garbage stem to make these kind of signifiers that have some tonality. It's not just some sort of transient or something powerful. It has like a tone to it, because I like to have tonality in these types of abilities too, because that's the type of thing that you like remember. Like if you try to think about my redesign in your head, you probably remember that, and then you remember like the end of it. You don't really remember like the low warbly stuff. You might remember like the fact of the electricity, but it's really those like kind of special incidental tonal moments and abilities and really sound design in general that you remember. So that was basically my goal with this. And so the way that I did those, was resampling my resampling. This one, again, I'm not going to break down every chain here because it's kind of no point, but this one I think was pretty interesting. Sounds terrible on its own, very unchill, but layered in with other stuff, it obviously works. Essentially pitch shifting, probably EQ to cut out lows, yeah. And then SpecOps, which is a plugin that I use a lot when I want something noisy. I find it's really cool for that. You really got to experiment with the settings here. I'm not going to dive into a tutorial of this plugin right now because it is deep. But essentially, it's FFT, and you can really mess with like the fidelity of it and just ruin audio in this way that often does not work at all on its own. It works really well as layers, and it works really well if you need like I reach for that plugin and put it on stuff when I'm like, I want top end, I want noise, I want interest, but I want it to be weird. That's my go-to plugin for that. So that kind of covers like the starting of the sound. And then there's also various things, like pretty much throughout everything I'm kind of keeping in mind, like the start of the ability, the end of the ability. That's why even without those tracks, you can still hear that the ability is starting and stopping. Where's that one? Sorry. Like you can still hear it starting. Like stuff that only plays, and that's due to like how I arrange the electricity, these two sort of watery hits here. Couple other subtle things, but these are really the bread and butter. That like you hear that, and maybe for whatever reason in game, your character needs to pay attention to when this ability is happening. You're waiting for them to burn it so that you can do something, move somewhere. You listen for that sound, right? Like that's the signifier for you. You don't give a shit about the rest of it. You're just listening for that. And then same with the ending. A lot of things sort of like build up into that ending. They sort of subtly transform because they don't get the benefit of having that sort of transient. They have to sort of be born out of the ability to not take up too much kind of like attention real estate, So get tons of stuff like this. Just lots and lots of layers of other stuff that I had grabbed, essentially resampling from that original pack. And just as you're designing sounds, you're thinking like, where am I putting this? Where am I putting this? So it's like, okay, well, I may as well accentuate those things, keep the middle clean, and blah, blah, blah. So that was the kind of these signifiers. And then you can see that I also have automation on lots of these things to create, like this one is just Echo Boy is doing a little bit of this, and the mix on Echo Boy. Pretty subtle at times. It just kind of creates this other tone, and then EQ and whatnot. Yeah, and that's I'll dive into I'll briefly kind of go over the tracks and stuff, but that is my general approach to this, is having, starting, ending, the ending is born out of the sound transforming, not too important at any point, but definitely having those signifiers for gameplay reasons, not relying on transients, not relying on essentially power, leaving, like, especially with the low end, you need to be very mindful about how you use that in these types of abilities, because it's like in mixing, right? Like you can't have too many things in the low end. Like it's like as you get higher in the frequency spectrum, you can have more things happening without them clashing too much or kind of like ruining the experience. But I find with low end, it's kind of like a single lane highway, you know, or maybe a 2-lane highway, where if this ability was going this whole time and it had like a pulsating sub or something really strong, right? And then some other ability needed to have like this huge transient, right? Like, how does that work in the mix and the engine, right? It's not going to work. There has to be some respect from other abilities to leave room for bigger things to pass through and to take up that attention when they need. Obviously, you can do these dynamic mixing things and whatever, but just like with mixing music, which is my actual background, with sound design for games, is if you can get it right at the source, that's the best way to do it, right? Like, this is my version of that. Whereas I want a vocal recording where the person isn't 1 inch from the mic and they're not 3 feet back. I'm designing this sound so I can just not put an excessive amount of bass in it to begin with. And if you're from the Discord, you can see all the entries. Like, everyone sort of also didn't do that, whether intentionally or instinctively. They didn't put tons and tons of super powerful low end throughout the entire thing and this like blasting ability the entire time for this. Everyone kind of understood that this is not like an ultimate ability and needs to kind of be toned down for a lot of it. So yeah, so I'll break down the sections here. We won't go track by track because there's a zillion of them, but basically you have the electricity here. Just from that original track that I had. The only thing that I did interesting was this track. I use Unfiltered Audio's Fault and Crystallizer, which both kind of actually do the same thing, but just kind of create these skitter-scattery delays, so that, because with electricity, you kind of want it to feel like it's flying places a little bit. So just that. Just a little bit loose, because at this quick editing, it can feel a little bit tight, which isn't necessarily, you want it to feel a little bit unwieldy, right? Like it's a dangerous ability. There needs to be a little bit of danger. So in the top end, you really have the electricity there. You have some of this stuff is going to be a mixture of both things. Again, that starting sound that I had here, lots of resampling from this, that probably garbage stem, which is just, I could probably pull it up really quickly if it just wanted to. It was something similar to if you have this plugin, I basically split this into 3 bands, go 3 times parallel, granulator, and then each multi-band I'm pitching down in different granular ways. Like top one going down 2 octaves, middle and bottom probably going down 1. Whoops. I'm guessing deleting this anyways, it doesn't matter. But essentially, just like when you pitch stuff down granular wise and you redistort it, you sort of like take away detail, which can be nice, especially if you're trying to create something washy, you know? That's how I kind of created that garbage stem, again, to reiterate for like the 3rd time. Wish I should just probably pull up that session and show it, but either way. Yeah, nothing groundbreaking in here. Just stuff to start it, stuff to end it. I think that's probably Unfiltered Audio's Fault. Just automating the pitch down on one of those resampled stems. Yeah, I'll go to the rest of the top end here because that's some more interesting stuff. This was my original attempt at the electricity before I decided that I needed to make a more powerful one. And sort of like do the whole granular resynthesis thing with phase plant in that sample. And so, apologies, this might be loud. Yeah, so I took that sample and then redid it through a few things. Yeah, just to kind of create, there's a ton of plugins here. Don't really know if again, SpecOps, this is something that you'll see a lot. Like whenever you see unfiltered audio, you can basically just assume it's either SpecOps, which really good for getting noise out of stuff, like interesting noise, like kind of bad noise, but layered in with other stuff. It's great. And then Fault to, because I find the really pitchy sort of sound is really sci-fi to me. Then just lots of EQ, OTT, kind of dynamics stuff to really like the name of the game for a lot of these sounds and these resamplings, like all of these like stem things was process it, squish it to death with OTT, and then reprocess it again and just keep on like pulling out noise and detail until you have this sort of like pretty digital sounding stuff. So anyways, those three sort of chains ended up with this. Which was cool, but it wasn't enough power. Like if I remove the electricity here, it's cool, but you're kind of missing the power that you get from this. Subtle, but adds a lot. And yeah, anywhere you can sort of take out stuff is always good too, especially with something like this. Like I wanted to keep it clean, so you know that's why there's looks very intentional, but often it's just, you know, try stuff, you know, remove that, blah blah blah. Just I didn't want the electricity happening like the whole time, you know, you want it kind of happening in spurts. It also makes the ability more interesting as it goes on, and it makes it kind of more memorable in a way that doesn't require you to remember it so well, if that makes sense. Some other stuff to kind of end it. Same story there, just a lot of resampling, probably a lot of SpecOps and whatnot and Fault. Then we have kind of the last section here, at least for this ability, is spectral tonal stuff. So first, got some, like, I don't even know if I had that on the, no, I didn't even have the reverb on here. Originally, I was going to try and reverb this all out, but anyways, it's a lot of resampling here. So this is kind of the main thing that I could not even, I don't even know if I have the chain here, if there's a point in keeping it. Yeah, it's just a lot of pitching stuff, a lot of stretching it. And so you can see, a lot of stuff that adds up into stuff. And I wish there was like an exact perfect rhyme or reason to a lot of this, but a lot of it's just experimenting. You know, you process something, you do that, you take a chunk out of it, new part of it. How does that sound? Just keep iterating until you kind of get something that works for you. And I just remembered from the name of this, I think I had one more way that I created source for this, which I just want to mention quickly. It was using Soothe, because Soothe is really cool. If you know this plugin, you'll probably know this already, but essentially this is just, it's more than this, but you can essentially think of it as like an automatic resonance killer. So, but what you can do, what's really cool with it, so normally you can just take the delta, which I think you can actually do in Reaper by default now. Yeah, you can do some, I didn't even know that before that, but with Soothe, if you take the delta of it, you get like really interesting spectral-ish stuff. Whoops. Bring up the gain even more. So that was one way that I was getting stuff. And it's crazy the results that you can get that I learned through this project, especially because I've never really had to do anything with this much limited audio. But what you can get out of processing something, pitching it down, shifting it, processing it again, doing that, getting all the spectral information, processing it again, distort it, do that again. And it's like completely unrecognizable from the original sound, but you just sort of start to gain this like innate sense of like, oh, this is going to sound cool if I do this. If I add more distortion to get more top end and sort of alter the pitch, and then I use this and cut out that one frequency and then resample, like it's crazy what you can get out of it. And this was basically just me experimenting with that. And that's why you can see this thing's been resampled like 6 times, 7 times to create a lot of this low end stuff in the play of the game, which I'll talk about after. Then there's this. Some static stuff. That's going to be the same thing, right? It's just a lot of resampling. You can see stem. That even you can just see from the waveform, that was probably some sort of hit, but just like stretched out like bazillion, you know, and then reprocessed, blah, blah, blah. So that was how I got all this kind of low end stuff here. And then there's just some automation to sort of clean it up in the mid-range or in the middle of the ability. And again, trying to focus a little bit on the starts and the end to create that cadence just for gameplay purposes. Yeah, that's pretty much the first ability here. A lot of tracks, I will admit, for such an ability, but you know, especially when you're working with such limited stuff. As far as the mech goes, may as well use this to kind of transition into the play of the game thing, but a lot of it was just actually taking stuff from here and pitching it and stretching it and whatever, because there wasn't a lot to work with, I guess. I'm just kind of solo the mech and the launch here. The launch is basically just some lower stuff. You can see I experimented a lot more tonality, because I wanted like a you know. You need to have some top end in this, or else it was just a bit odd. But so yeah, the mech. You can see a lot of this wasn't even from my resampling things. It was actually just taken straight from here. And just layering it and kind of like stacking it domino style to kind of create that like a longer sound, you know, because I felt like the chain impacts and whatever that we had to work with were, that wasn't going to work, you know. So pitching them down a lot, stacking them like that. And then I also created from one of the believe I should have it here. Yep, probably. Yeah, so it was taking one of the samples that we had to work with, excuse me, triggering it with like an envelope to sort of create something harder, like you would do if you were making like a kick drum or something, and then automating a bunch of stuff according to that envelope too, and then you just sort of get what is, believe, because I made like a little pack out of it because I liked what I was getting. Yeah. So depending on the octave that you played, you could get the low, you could get the high, and the mid range. And so that was all created using one of those samples from the pack, the Discord freebies that we had to work with. So let's move on to the play of the game. This one is even more disorganized because, so I apologize if this part of the video is a little bit scuffed, whatnot, but it's because essentially I made the ability first, and then I wanted to pull from all of that stuff and resample it and whatnot as much as possible to create the play of the game. So first of all, have a lot of mech stuff, and then this also has something I'll mute for now and talk about in a sec. But basically the mech of this part, I'll let you watch it we'll watch the whole thing to get a refresher, because it's been a while. Pretty darn cool, right? Okay, so first I'll just mute this low end thing, because yeah, stuff is kind of just not where you would expect it to be compared to the first ability in terms of the session. So I'm going to be scrolling a lot here as I talk about this and sort of figuring out how to describe it all, because a lot of it is resampled. So we'll try and breeze over this without yapping for 80 years. But basically, this is all the mech, which is essentially the same process as the mech at the start, just you got to experiment a lot. You got to layer stuff. You got to check through all the, like these ones, this transient, these all sounded good. A lot less stacked, right? Like I wanted more of a transient there. I didn't want it to be as thick. I wanted it to kind of poke through, especially with the mix, because there's a lot of other stuff happening there. A lot of pitching stuff, a lot of layering in like other sounds, like other pitch sounds from stuff that I had resampled from other areas. And a lot of this stuff that I didn't use, I ended up resampling for this. But it's a lot of the same process that I've already kind of gone through at length here. It's just stretch, OTT, pull up detail, process, OTT, pull up detail, like really try and see what sort of textures you can explore the sound and all of its like imperfections and artifacts from the processing, right? The interesting thing here, which I debated about for a while, is this low end sort of like reverb hit thing. I think I debated not having the reverb on it. I'll try this. Like, it sounds cool to me, right? It sounds like some sort of Elden Ring type of thing. I think I even did that waveform, Marshall McGee, he made this video recently where like he talked about getting that Elden Ring sound, and it's basically just these 2 points into reverb. And I'm like, wow, that was actually super simple. It helps you get like a cleaner, I guess, ring out on something like that. And then I put that into a ton of reverb and then into just a bit of distortion. But without the reverb, it was like, I believe it was powerful, but not good. Like, it sounds too organic, right? I went back and forth on this like a bunch. This was one of the last things that I added to it, and I just couldn't decide whether or not I wanted that to be reverbed out. But I ended up keeping it, obviously, because I think it just sounds cool, whether it makes sense in context of whatever. But it sounds like this big, like, I know the gun that she uses isn't like massive, but in my head, if you've played League of Legends and you know what Senna's gun looks like, that's what kind of made me think of, is like this huge gun, right? And regardless of how big the gun is, this, like, it's big on screen, right? We're making a big, powerful thing here. It's a big gun for these purposes, even though it's like not really so massive. Sometimes you gotta flex, you gotta go hard, you gotta exaggerate, right? And then the source for that is just something from resampled plus pretty simple hit, but it's just these little pokies and then the reverb, which really gives it that sound. You know, like that you could have that, like you open a chest in that dungeon deep somewhere, you know, it's a really cool sound. And I think it was an interesting texture to juxtapose a lot of the kind of like electronic or electricity noise that's happening throughout the rest of it. So kept that in. Again, I'm not going to go through all these little tracks here, but essentially these all add up into my mech. If you know my redesigns, I do quite a bit of layering, so especially in a disorganized project like this with so much resampling, going track by track is kind of pointless. Maybe I'll put the stems somewhere or whatever if people are interested. I don't know. This stuff I had actually done like way at the start, thinking I would use that as the launcher, but just ended up using that as a layer as part of the openingness of it. Yeah, yes, the openingness. And where is the kind of this main thing here? One sec, let me find it. Yeah, so this is, I would say, the core of it. Or really like the high-end energy. And so, again, this is a lot of resampling and stuff, but I'll break it down as much as I can. And this is SpecOps. You can really see this thing is just so powerful. This I'd actually resampled where this ability was at a certain point. I do that pretty often. Like it'll be at a certain point and I'll resample it, and then I'll take that resample and then I'll process it and it'll be part of it, right? Like I guess just resampling the output instead of just like an individual track, and then putting this preset that I had made for something else on there. Pretty cool stuff. And then I just made this first part mono because the eye is like really in the center. And then as it goes on, it gets wider. But anyways, I'll go over the death sound later. This is like the main energy sound, or the top end power energy. I debated not having that final like actual shot sound, because in the actual thing I'm pretty sure do I have it here? No, I don't have the original audio for this up in this session, but it's from what I saw, it doesn't actually like play the shot sound because it kind of like fades into the actual replay of the game. So it's not this big build up into a huge powerful shot. It's kind of actually not that powerful, but I mean, for this, it was cool, right? It was a redesign. It was a challenge, want to do something cool. So anyways, breaking this down is got stereo to change that. You got OTT to bring everything up. You got, well, most of everything, kind of took down the mid. Soothe just to kind of tame some stuff. A lot of distortion, and then reverb. And then a lot of that, also distortion, I really like hard clip. That you're going to see hard clip and bias on pretty much anything I use this distortion on. I have decapitator too, obviously, but I don't know. I really like this one sometimes, especially for something dirtier. Then there's a decent amount of automation, which I'll break into in a sec. But essentially, I took one of these stems, which I'll actually get rid of all this for a second, we'll hear it. Yeah, you can hear there's a lot to be desired. So with all of these things, it's essentially just OTT, distortion, and then reverb. But I'm automating a lot of stuff here, like the stereo width is going up to accentuate certain parts. The distortion is being driven up to kind of create, again, like you can see the story of this moment, of this play of the game camera here. You have the eye thing here, and then as the ability builds, you're adding more and more distortion. And then with the reverb, I want it to get drier towards the end to sort of be more powerful, I guess, and sort of come from, also this is where like that low reverb hit happens. Like in this middle section, like just kind of my other thing too, you're creating this sort of, spiritual is the wrong word, like spectral sort of like low end power type of thing, that if this ability comes from the reverb, right? It comes from something else. It comes from like a power source. That's kind of why I automated the reverb down like that and had it all to begin with. And then it's just layering a bunch of stuff here. I experimented a lot with these types of things, especially when you're pushing like multiple tracks into one distortion. It's easy to, like anything you add is going to change the sound very, very drastically. So you can see I experimented lots of things. There's probably like twice as many tracks here before, but kind of landed on there's one in the original track, and then there's this, and this, and yeah, so that ends up being this nice kind of powerful track. which is sort of like the chaos, the power, and then without it. Cleans it up. You could tame it if you really didn't want it, but especially the starting here, it's not super integral, but it really adds a lot to the end there. Also, something you'll notice, like I really wanted there to be a nice transient at the end here, so there's this gap here in pretty much every track to create that. Yeah, breaking down the electricity. Again, kind of these two things. There's the focal point of the eye, and then builds up to the ability. Nothing groundbreaking there. Let's save some time and not go over that. Just the same thing as before. Then all the tonal stuff. This is where rhyme or reason, starting with the eye, ending with the ability, just basically going here. You can even see it's pretty similar. Like I would literally just take all of this, copy this all over, and then chop it up and try and make it work for this section. So it was kind of like working essentially that whole first part. But of course, you're doing tons of stuff. It's completely different. Same tracks and a lot of the same audio files, and not a lot of like new processing in this section, at least for these parts. But you're changing the pitch, you're changing the pitches, or the fades, you're changing like the timing of things. You're, aligning lots of things for this eye thing here, which is like probably 40 tracks or whatever, ending up on this one little sound, right? But a lot of it was just resampling, or not even resampling, just shifting around those original sounds, which were already cool. And some of them, using more, some reversing it. No point in breaking down each little sound individually, especially as I already sort of broke them down over there. But essentially, like, you get all your watery stuff. A lot of little sounds add up to a lot. Same with the granular stuff. I let a little bit more of that come through at the low end part because it is low end and it adds a nice little color to it and a little dirt. Because without it, it's a little bit too clean. Just adds a little bit of rumble on that kind of low end part that we were discussing before. And then at the end there, you have a lot of power from that. But not necessarily like super low end. A lot of these things take up the same space in the mix as they talked about before, so I won't like go on at length about fitting these in the mix in context of all the other abilities and whatever. But in general, with this play of the game thing, I took more liberties in making the attack bigger and stronger, because it's not a gameplay ability, right? It's just you get to just do something cool that sounds cool, and it's sort of impressive, right? Like you got the play of the game. It's a cool thing to happen. So you can get a little bit more powerful with it. And I took the liberty of actually making the final shot powerful because I wanted to. I thought it would be cool, and it was. So same thing with these noise rhythmics that I showed off before. Nothing groundbreaking there. Just editing them basically to match the new thing. And then with this, I believe that I probably just, again, you can see like this one in the first part, it's actually pretty small. And then in the second part, it's pretty loud. Yeah, a lot of that. Couple new things here. Oops. Again, sometimes I won't necessarily want something front and center, so I'll kind of tuck it in the back of the mix, use a little bit of it, whatever works, right? Same story with all the low end stuff here. There's a bit more new stuff here, I guess. A lot of that wobbliness is coming from fault, which I've talked about before. Just frequency or pitch shifted echoes. Sounds awesome. sounds futuristic, especially layered in. It doesn't sound as like goofy, you know? Get this. Just working on like the low end to get it nice and full. Oh god, she's looking at me. Too creepy to have the eye right there. Yeah, that's basically it. So a lot of it, other than this powerful sort of top end layer, was just taken from the original ability, ported over, chopped up in a lot of different ways, stretched. Some stuff is processed a bit, but in general, just having that and then the mechanics stuff, that low end sort of like ancient hit thing, which I think adds a lot. Then your very heavily distorted automated thing to kind of really tell the story of all the energy of this moment. And yeah, this is probably, I have not paid attention. This has probably been a long video. If you watch this, that's crazy. But, and I hope maybe you've learned something from my approach. Obviously, I'm not a professional sound designer yet. Hopefully soon. But this was a really cool challenge. Thanks for, if anybody who actually put it on is watching this, thanks for putting it on. If you're just watching this and you like to hear me yap, thanks for listening to me yap. I hope that I've taught you something or given you different context or a way to think about something. I'll stop here before I talk for 20 more minutes. Probably forgot some stuff, probably included too much, whatever. Have a good day.